You think you can control me forever? Ryan Mitchell muttered under his breath, staring at the message that glowed on his phone screen. A cruel blend of arrogance and indifference from Emily that made his stomach knot with a mix of disbelief and simmering frustration, the words slicing through the quiet of his living room like ice, demanding attention. The morning sun filtered softly through the blinds, casting narrow stripes across the hardwood floor. And yet the warmth outside contrasted sharply with the chill that had settled. Inside him, a feeling he had grown accustomed to over months of subtle manipulations and dismissive remarks, each one a reminder that his efforts, his care, and his dedication were somehow always secondary to her whims, a wallet not yet emptied. A statement so bold it was almost theatrical, and Ryan could not help but replay her tone in his head. The mockery underlying her words as if she were performing for an audience that existed only in her mind. He sank into the edge of his sofa, letting the phone rest on his knee, his fingers drumming lightly, not out of impatience but to occupy the restless energy that threatened to overtake him. The energy that had once fueled his attempts to placate, to charm, to reason, but now was pivoting into something new, something calculated, a patience forged from repeated indignities and quiet observations. He studied the details around him, the framed family photos slightly askew on the mantel, the cup of coffee cooling on the side table, the faint hum of traffic beyond the window, and felt a resolve crystallizing, a clarity that came from seeing the patterns Emily had woven through their life together, the dismissals, the jokes at his expense, the carefully constructed image of herself that left little room for mutual respect. It all added up, and Ryan realized that reacting in the heat of anger would only play into her hands, that the real power lay in calm, in strategic decisions made with foresight rather than emotion. He pulled out a notebook from the drawer, its pages blank and inviting, a stark contrast to the messy emotions he had been carrying, and began to jot down thoughts, questions, and observations, each line a small act of reclaiming space, of asserting his voice in a scenario that had long felt skewed against him, his handwriting neat and deliberate, a tangible sign of the methodical mindset forming in response to the chaos of manipulative remarks and empty threats. Ryan knew that this was not merely a story about a single cruel text or a passing moment of frustration, but a deeper narrative of boundary, self-respect, and the recognition that emotional investment without reciprocity was unsustainable. And as he wrote, a tentative plan began to emerge, one that respected his values, acknowledged the imbalance of power, and promised actions aligned with integrity and foresight. An internal promise that no longer would he chase approval or affirmation from someone unwilling to provide even basic respect. And in that quiet morning light, with the notebook open and his mind focused, Ryan Mitchell felt the first true sense of control in months. The first moment where he could consider his next steps not as reactive measures to Emily's whims, but as deliberate choices guided by clarity, principle, and the enduring understanding that self-respect was not negotiable. Ryan Mitchell sat quietly at the kitchen table, the morning light spilling across the counter, his coffee steaming gently beside him, a small ritual that had become grounding as he processed the text from Emily. He reflected on the months leading up to this moment, noticing the pattern of dismissive comments and subtle manipulations that had gradually eroded his confidence. The casual way Emily had framed herself as untouchable, always in control, always the one dictating when and how they interacted, a reality that forced Ryan to confront the imbalance between his patience and her expectations. And he realized that his previous attempts to placate or reason had done little more than reinforce her behavior, giving her the sense of power she so evidently craved. He reviewed the past evening, the dinner that had seemed ordinary, yet in retrospect had been filled with Emily's sharp remarks disguised as jokes, and he understood that what had been dismissed as playful teasing was in fact a persistent undermining of his self-esteem, a series of small, deliberate nudges designed to test his limits. And that recognition brought a wave of clarity, a sense that he needed a new approach, one rooted in strategy rather than reaction, one that allowed him to maintain dignity while also asserting boundaries in a way that was calm, but unmistakable. As he sipped his coffee, he began to formulate a plan, jotting down notes in the small notebook he had kept at his side, listing situations where he could assert his needs without escalation, moments where he could demonstrate calm self-assurance in the face of provocation, and ways to communicate clearly what was acceptable and what was not, understanding that consistency would be key in shifting the dynamic. Ryan thought about the upcoming weekend, the interactions that would likely test his resolve, and he envisioned himself navigating those encounters with poise, allowing Emily to express her frustrations while not giving in to them, recognizing that his silence, his measured responses, and his deliberate choices could speak louder than any argument, that power could be wielded through composure and clarity, not aggression. He considered the impact on friends and family who might notice the tension, and he reminded himself that the goal was not to create drama, but to reclaim his own sense of self, to establish an equilibrium where he could participate in the relationship on his own terms, not under constant negotiation or threat of dismissal. As the morning unfolded, Ryan felt a quiet resolve settling in, a determination that he would respond to Emily's provocations not with anger or resentment, but with deliberate action, a demonstration of self-respect that would ultimately shift the balance, a path that required patience, observation, and unwavering adherence to his principles. And he knew that by acting thoughtfully, he could reshape the narrative of their interactions, moving from reactive patterns to proactive, controlled choices. And with each passing moment, the sense of empowerment grew, a calm certainty that he was finally beginning to take ownership of his own life and decisions. By mid-morning, Ryan Mitchell had filled 3 pages in the notebook, not with accusations, not with angry lines he planned to throw back at Emily, but with dates, patterns, and moments that had quietly changed the shape of his marriage. He wrote about the night she laughed at his budget spreadsheet in front of her sister, calling him adorable for thinking numbers made him a man. He wrote about the weekend she charged a $1,200 spa package to their shared card after promising they would save for roof repairs. He wrote about the dinner with her friends when she placed her hand over his wallet on the table and said, "Relax, he lives for this," while everyone laughed like his discomfort was part of the entertainment. At the time, each moment had felt small enough to forgive. That was how disrespect survived, by arriving in pieces too tiny to confront without looking dramatic. But written down in sequence, the truth had weight. Ryan leaned back in the chair, the house quiet around him, the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking above the doorway, sunlight sliding across the floor in pale rectangles. He thought about the man he had been when he married Emily, a 34-year-old sales manager with a used pickup truck, a steady job, and the stubborn belief that generosity could make any home safe. He had built their life one careful choice at a time, paid off her credit cards after the first year because she said she wanted a clean start, covered the down payment on the townhouse outside Denver because her savings had gone to graduate classes she never finished, took extra client calls at night so they could travel, upgrade furniture, host holidays, keep up the image she loved showing everyone else. And slowly, without noticing, he had become less of a husband and more of a funding source with a heartbeat. That realization did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like cold air under a door. He closed the notebook and looked at his phone. Emily had not come home yet, but her social media story had updated 10 minutes earlier. A brunch table, 3 mimosas, a shopping bag with a designer logo. Her caption read, "Some women know their worth." Ryan stared at it long enough for the words to lose their sparkle. Then he took a screenshot, not because he needed revenge, but because clarity sometimes needs a receipt. He opened his banking app and reviewed the shared account, line by line, his eyes moving over charges that told a story Emily never said out loud. Boutique purchases, salon visits, weekend lunches, a hotel bar charge from a Thursday. He had been told she was working late. Nothing explosive by itself. Everything revealing together. His thumb hovered over the screen, but he did not act yet. That was the old mistake, reacting before understanding the whole board. Instead, he opened his contacts and found the number of a financial advisor named Martin Hayes, a man he had met through work 2 years earlier. Ryan sent one calm message. "I need to review separate accounts and household spending. Available next week." Then he placed the phone face down, picked up his coffee, and let the silence settle. For the first time, the silence did not feel like fear. It felt like a door he had finally learned how to close. Ryan spent the next few days observing patterns he had long ignored, noticing how Emily's attention flickered between her phone and the room, rarely landing fully on him. He remembered the small remarks she made about spending, the subtle jokes about his limitations, and the way she smiled at other men in casual encounters, always dismissing his concerns with a laugh or a shrug. He stopped reacting immediately to her messages, stopped calling to check if she was out or with friends, and instead focused on clarity, writing out his boundaries and expectations in a notebook that he kept locked in his desk. At work, he found his mind clearer than it had been in years. He realized that absence, not confrontation, sometimes drew the truest picture of a relationship. He met with Martin Hayes, the financial advisor, and began untangling the shared accounts, establishing separate lines of responsibility, and understanding the real estate owe. Ryan woke up Saturday morning feeling a quiet determination he had not known before. The sun filtered softly through the blinds, illuminating the room in warm golden light, and he sat at the kitchen table reviewing his notes and the financial plan he had been building all week. Each page represented control he had taken back over his life, and he felt a sense of clarity that replaced the anxiety he had carried for so long. He made a cup of coffee, carefully measured and poured, appreciating the small rituals that grounded him, and thought about the interactions he would have today, choosing not to react impulsively to messages or notifications. Emily continued her routines, her voice and laughter echoing through the house. Yet Ryan noticed the difference in his own responses. He did not feel the compulsion to chase, to explain, or to justify his time. Instead, he focused on tasks that mattered to him, organizing his workspace, updating his personal goals, and preparing for upcoming work projects. In the afternoon, he went for a long walk, observing the neighborhood with attention, noting details he had ignored before, and found a satisfying rhythm in solitude. He returned home and began drafting a letter to himself, summarizing insights, boundaries, and reflections on what had been happening in his relationship, without naming blame, but rather highlighting facts and his chosen responses. This act of writing clarified thoughts, reinforced decisions, and offered a sense of peace. He also reviewed his financial accounts, confirming that all adjustments and separations were properly documented, and realized that his independence was now tangible, not merely a concept. Evening fell, and he prepared dinner, mindful of flavors and textures, enjoying the simplicity of self-care and the empowerment that came from structuring his day around his own intentions. As night deepened, he sat in the living room with soft music, reflecting on how he had transformed his passive anxiety into active mindfulness, and how every choice he made in the last few days reinforced his control over his time, attention, and resources. Ryan felt no urge for confrontation. He was not plotting revenge, but he understood that his restraint and preparation would shape the reality he wished to experience. He acknowledged that the path forward would present challenges, and he felt prepared to face them with awareness and patience, having established a firm foundation of personal boundaries and internal clarity. The night closed with Ryan feeling a quiet strength, a readiness to act thoughtfully in the coming days, and a deepened understanding of the power of measured response, observation, and intentional living. Monday morning came in pale and quiet, with a thin layer of frost on the lawn and the kind of blue winter light that made every object in the house look sharper than usual. Ryan Mitchell woke before his alarm, showered, dressed, and made coffee without checking whether Emily had left him any messages overnight. That small omission felt bigger than it should have. For years, his mornings had begun with her mood. If she was cold, he softened. If she was irritated, he adjusted. If she was cheerful, he felt permitted to breathe. Now he stood in the kitchen alone, measuring grounds into the coffee maker, listening to the water hiss and drip, and realized how much of his life had been organized around preventing another person from being unhappy with him. At 8:30, he drove to Martin Hayes' office downtown, taking the long route past glass buildings, brown winter trees, and coffee shops with people lining up inside like Monday was something they still trusted. Martin was a quiet man with silver glasses and a calm voice, the type who did not waste words to sound important. He spread Ryan's printed statements across the desk, tapped a pen once, and said, "You have been carrying more than a household. You have been carrying a lifestyle." Ryan looked at the numbers and felt the sentence land in his chest. Mortgage, insurance, utilities, her luxury memberships, her credit card balance transfers, her car lease, The weekly charges that looked harmless until they stood together in one column like witnesses. Martin did not tell him to make emotional decisions. He told him to separate what was necessary from what was optional, what was shared from what was being quietly extracted, what was support from what had become entitlement. By the time Ryan walked out, he had a clean plan. Open a new personal account, redirect his paycheck, preserve shared household payments, stop covering non-essential spending that was never agreed upon, and schedule a legal consultation before making any larger move. It was not revenge. It was oxygen. On the drive home, Emily texted him 3 times. The first asked why one of her cards had been declined at a boutique downtown. The second said he needed to fix it because she was embarrassed. The third was shorter, colder, "Do not start acting powerful now." Ryan pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment with his hands resting on the steering wheel. The old Ryan would have called immediately, apologized, transferred money, and swallowed the insult just to lower the temperature. This Ryan took a breath, opened the message thread, and typed one sentence. Shared funds will cover shared responsibilities only. He read it twice, made sure there was no anger in it, then sent it. Inside the house, the afternoon light stretched across the floor. Emily was waiting in the living room when he opened the door, phone in her hand, face tight with disbelief. "You froze me out?" she asked. Ryan set his keys in the bowl by the door. "No," he said. "I stopped funding what I never agreed to." The room went still. Not because he had shouted, because he had not. Emily Mitchell stood in the living room with her phone still in her hand, looking at Ryan Mitchell as if he had changed languages without warning. The afternoon light made a pale line across the carpet between them, and for a long second neither of them crossed it. "That money was always there," she said, her voice sharp but controlled, the way people sound when they are trying to make panic look like authority. Ryan removed his coat, hung it neatly by the door, and walked to the kitchen without rushing. "It was there for our home," he said. "Not for whatever you decided I should silently absorb." The coffee from the morning still sat in the pot, dark and cold. He poured it down the sink, rinsed the glass, and listened to the water run while Emily followed him, her steps quick against the floor. She started with irritation, then switched to disbelief, then tried a laugh that did not land. "So this is your big move? You are punishing me with spreadsheets." Ryan dried the cup and placed it in the cabinet. "No, I am finally reading them." That sentence took more from her than anger would have. He could see it in the small pause before she answered, the blink that came too late, the way her grip tightened around the phone. For years, she had treated money like weather, something that simply arrived, something she did not need to understand because Ryan would always stand between her and consequence. Now the weather had changed. She walked to the island and tapped her nails against the marble. "You are being dramatic." Ryan turned then, calm enough to make the room feel colder. "Emily, last week you called me a wallet in a message you thought I would never see. Today you are upset because the wallet closed." Her face lost color, not completely, just enough to tell him the words had found their mark. She looked down at her phone, then back at him. "You went through my messages?" He shook his head. "No. You sent it to the group chat while my tablet was still connected to the shared account. It appeared on the kitchen counter while I was making coffee." The truth sat between them with the quiet weight of a locked door. Emily's mouth opened, then closed. He remembered another version of her. The woman who once cried when he surprised her with plane tickets to San Diego after her mother recovered from surgery. The woman who used to hold his hand in grocery store aisles. The woman who said she loved how steady he was. Somewhere along the way, steady had become usable. Reliable had become disposable. Generous had become foolish. Ryan did not say any of that. He did not need to. Instead, he walked to his office, picked up the folder Martin had helped him organize, and returned to. The night had fallen, and the house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. Ryan Mitchell sat at the dining table, reviewing statements and notes, the soft yellow light from the pendant lamp casting a warm glow over the organized chaos of papers. Emily Mitchell entered from the living room, her footsteps hesitant, carrying a half-empty cup of tea that had gone cold. She stopped at the threshold, watching him without speaking, as though the act of crossing the room required courage she was unsure she possessed. Ryan looked up, acknowledging her presence with a simple nod, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm of uncertainty in the room. "I thought you would be angry," she said quietly. setting the cup down. I am not, he replied, folding a sheet of paper neatly, placing it on top of a folder he had labeled for clarity. I am focused. Focused on the fact that we are now operating under reality, not assumption. Emily crossed the room and took a seat opposite him, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. She had spent years seeing his generosity as infinite, his patience as unconditional, but the events of the past weeks had eroded that illusion. You are serious, she said, her voice unsteady. Completely, Ryan answered, leaning back slightly in his chair, the lines of stress on his face softened by the resolute calm of someone who had decided to stop being manipulated by circumstance. Outside, a car passed slowly, headlights flickering through the blinds, adding brief shadows to the floor. Emily's mind raced through scenarios, each one more improbable than the last, yet none as improbable as the steadfast determination she now observed in Ryan. This changes everything, she whispered, almost to herself. Yes, he said simply, because reality always does, eventually. They both sat in silence for a long moment, each processing the weight of the unspoken words between them. Then Emily sighed, a mixture of exasperation and reluctant acknowledgement, the kind of sigh that comes when someone realizes that resistance is futile. So what now? She asked, her tone tentative. Ryan gestured toward the papers in front of him. Now, we proceed with clarity. You have responsibilities, as do I. Decisions are made consciously, not assumed. That is how we function from this point forward. Emily nodded slowly, understanding but not fully accepting, the room filled with a tense yet purposeful quiet. Ryan opened a pen and began writing notes for the week ahead, detailing tasks and responsibilities, marking them with precision and calm. Emily watched, her hands resting on the table, contemplating her own role in this new dynamic. The evening stretched on, hours marked only by the movement of shadows across the walls, the house settling into a rhythm of accountability and silent resolve. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, a soft reminder that the world continued beyond their walls, indifferent to personal strife, while inside, two lives intersected in a moment of unprecedented equilibrium, each person measuring the other with careful thought and restrained emotion, the air heavy with the unspoken understanding that everything had shifted and nothing would be the same. By morning, Ryan Mitchell understood that the coldest revenge was not cruelty, not public embarrassment, not some loud performance meant to prove he had been hurt. It was peace with boundaries attached. Emily Mitchell woke to a house that still functioned, but no longer revolved around her convenience. The mortgage was paid. The lights stayed on. Groceries sat in the refrigerator. Nothing essential had been taken from her. But the invisible river of extra money, automatic forgiveness, and quiet emotional labor had stopped flowing. Ryan stood in the kitchen at 7:15, pouring coffee into a travel mug while frost silvered the edges of the window. Emily came downstairs in a cream sweater, her face tired from a night of realizing that charm could not reopen every door. She looked at the folder on the counter, then at him. Are we really going to live like this? She asked. Ryan tightened the lid on his coffee and met her eyes. No, he said. I'm not going to live like this anymore. The answer was calm enough to remove every argument she had prepared. She crossed her arms, trying to recover the old rhythm, the one where she pressed, he softened, and the world bent back into shape around her. So what? You are leaving. Ryan picked up his keys. I am meeting an attorney this afternoon. After that, we will decide what is fair, what is legal, and what is separate. Emily's mouth opened slightly, but no clever sentence came out. For years, she had believed his patience was proof that he would never move. She mistook steadiness for surrender. She mistook generosity for blindness. She mistook love for a bank account that never asked questions. Ryan looked around the house one last time before work, at the framed vacation photos, the dining table, the hallway where they used to leave muddy shoes after spring hikes. He did not hate those memories. That was the hardest part. They had been real once. But real memories cannot pay for present disrespect. At the door, Emily said his name, softer this time. He paused without turning fully back. I was angry when I saw what you wrote, he said. But I am not angry enough to keep financing my own humiliation. The house went quiet around that sentence. Outside, the morning air was sharp, clean, and cold. Ryan stepped onto the porch, closed the door gently behind him, and walked to his truck with the kind of dignity that does not need an audience. Later, he would sit in a quiet law office, review options, and begin the slow work of untangling a life he once thought would last forever. But in that moment, he had already won the only thing worth winning back, himself. So after hearing Ryan's choice, what would you have done in his place? Would you keep paying for a life where you were treated like a resource instead of a partner, or would you finally protect your dignity? If stories like this make you think about respect, loyalty, and the quiet power of walking away without losing yourself, stay with this channel. Because sometimes the sharpest answer is not revenge, it is refusing to be used ever again.